Greetings to us and welcome to another video. Today is an unfortunate day. Um, Yesterday we had the reveal of all the Ashened cards that are debuting in Legacy of Destruction. And when it comes to TCG exclusive archetypes, Konami just has this trend of just summoning different cards in different waves. And usually, the second wave of support is what's going to dictate whether or not the archetype is promising. As of late, we've been receiving multiple TCG exclusive archetypes that are very, very close in their potential. Like the first wave just shows one or two cards that look very, very promising. Like for example, Vados, the Eruption Dragon, is an excellent hand trap. I think it's a monster that can fit well into the meta game. Uh, if we look at Testina, like Breath of Testina, the Field Spell, like the Sentinel, and the Demigod, all look like really good cards for that deck. However, those are not enough to just sell the deck itself. We need other cards within the archetype that just makes the deck playable. And if the second wave of support is not as good as the first one, then the archetype most likely is not going to be successful uh, because in time and time again, we've just seen that the ceiling of these decks are not up to par with the ceiling of the decks in the current format. If we look at past archetypes like Cosmo, Danger, Burning Abyss, just to name uh, like the main few ones, those archetypes were good right from the first wave. The first wave of support was enough to like make the deck be spearheaded into the format, and it was only a matter of just receiving cards from the second wave that didn't have to be as good as the first wave, but were good enough. So we'll just talk about the new Ashen cards, and then I'll talk about like what does this mean for the TCG. We have two new spells, one new trap, and two new monsters, and we have two extra deck monsters. And to no surprise, there are fusion monsters. I'm just going to summarize all of them because by the time you're watching this video, you probably already know all of them by now. Just like all the Ashen monsters, Spearhead and Shaman can special summon themselves if you control Obsidian. Shaman is a mini Avarice for Pyro monsters, and if you return the Ashens, you can retrieve the field spell. Spearhead is just a tribute to bounce a card. Reignite is basically a rehashed Forbidden Chalice by returning banished or like graveyard Ashen cards into the deck. This is basically polymerization for monsters on either field. And you can banish this to turn monsters into pyros. This is Foolish Burial for Dark Pyros. And if you have a level 5 or higher, you can just retrieve one from the graveyard. And in the graveyard, you can polymerize your pyro monsters. Embers of the Ashened is essentially Berserker of the Tengi, but whenever it fights a pyro monster. Vados the Endless Dragon is basically Heavy Storm, or Harpy's Feather Duster rather. And if your opponent activates a card, you can send an Ashen to just send the card to graveyard. And it cannot be targeted by monster effects. And it cannot be destroyed by card effects. That pretty much summarizes all the new cards. What does this mean for the archetype? So I'll start with the benefits first. The first benefit is we have more lower level Ashen monsters, and they're level 4. That means that we have access to rank 4 monsters in our extra deck. And even though rank 4 monsters have not been good as of late, we do have a couple of really good ones. Like Dweller, for example, is a really good one. Since they're all dark monsters, they can play either Evil Sword Nightmare or Raider's Knight, which means that the Arc Rebellion OTK is a possibility in this deck. You can play Banshee, and Banshee is like win condition in this deck because this can access you to Vados or to other Ashen monsters. Just summoning Baguska is also really strong. Baguska to this day is like one of the best rank for monsters in the game. So that's like one benefit from that behalf. Them being dark monsters means that you can play Allure. If we talk about the spell cards and the trap cards, this one is like the best one out of the three. It kind of just missed the mark because you can only add from your graveyard to your hand a level 5 or higher pyro, which incentivizes this card to just send your higher level Ashen monsters. That is really unfortunate because if we had the ability to just grab level 4 pyros, that means this card was gonna be a searcher for Priestess, which means this could have started your entire engine, which means that we already had a consistency card in our deck besides Bonfire. But sadly, because of that specific level restriction, we kind of are forced to play Bonfire in our deck. It's not the end of the world because this card can get you to Vados, and Vados is one of the win conditions of the deck. Also, this being able to fusion summon from the graveyard, uh, like banishing itself, is also really really good. So, if we look at the thematic theme of the deck, uh, the win condition is right there. Like the win condition is basically getting to Vados Dragon and just wipe out your opponent's board and just try looping Vados and looping resources around Vados and just keep juggling resources against your opponent by just using Vados as a catalyst on their board and either popping it with Hero or just like fusing it for Vados Dragon and so on and so forth. So the big issue with this deck and like one of the sad things about this deck is that it does have a solid win condition, but this win condition is very slow. Vados has the ability to set like both of these trap cards, and both these trap cards are really good. But the fact that it sets the trap cards and doesn't just place them face up is incredibly disheartening. It just slows down your win condition a lot. If you are doing this on your first turn, that means you have to flip the cards on the next turn. If you're summoning Vados on your opponent's turn to just try to disrupt some of their plays, if they're playing field spells, uh, it essentially means that you have to wait an entire turn for these trap cards to just function. And these trap cards do not have graveyard effects. I mean, this one does, but it's not like a very meaningful one. Meaning that uh, if these cards leave the board by your opponent, which is not really a hard, daunting task for your opponent to do, you are essentially are getting gutted out of your win condition. Like more than that. So now that we talked about a few dis benefits about the deck, let's talk about a few benefits. The fact that most of these cards work with the banishment outside of endlessness and extinguish means that you can play dimension shifter in this deck. And Dimension Shifter is a really powerful card. I think any deck that can play Dimension Shifter is a deck that should be respected this format. However, and I will make another Yu-Gi Alert episode out of that. I think we're going to be receiving other strategies that just benefit out of Shifter. Also, like the more meta matchups that we have in the game, they don't all lose to Shifter. Like some of them will be able to play around it if they deck build properly. Another advantage out of this archetype is the fusions. work with pyro monsters, which means Snake Eye can be used as an engine. But not only that, you can also pair this deck well against Snake Eyes by using cards like full Super Polymerization and Endlessness to just wipe out their board bit by bit. I think that was the main purpose behind this archetype. I think Konami intended to make this archetype just function well into the Snake Eye deck because Snake Eye is like the only real tier 1 pyro deck that we've had like ever. As I mentioned beforehand, Allure of Darkness can be played in this deck. Another card that works with the theme is Volcanic Emperor. Since Volcanic Emperor can just banish 3 Pyro monsters to summon itself, and you don't care that your Pyro monsters are getting banished because you do have a way to just return them back to your deck with Shaman. If you play multiple Shaman, you kind of have an infinite resource loop in your strategy. That's not to say that that should be mandatory to do in this deck because it is. This card is essentially a brick if you're not like in the later turns. One card that I two cards that we can talk about. The first is Gaia Prominence. This card can be summoned off of Extinguish effect. However, it does need the Gaia Blaze, Force of the Sun, as a fusion material. So, if you can essentially get to Gaia Blaze, which is not the hardest thing in the world, there are cards like, for example, Fusion Armament that can summon this card. You can essentially just use Extinguish and use Extinguish effect to just banish it from the graveyard and just fuse into Gaia Prominence. And Gaia Prominence is a very respectable boss monster. It's basically a monster negate, and this can reborn fire monsters from the graveyard. Despite this being like a fire attribute deck, a dark attribute archetype, uh, this can serve a purpose in the future. Now let's talk about one other exploitable card that we can play in this deck. And I don't know if Konami intended to do that on purpose or not, but this is a very, very, very old card that not many people know about. So, Chain Material reads anytime you fusion summon a monster's turn, you can banish from field, hand, graveyard the fusion materials for the fusion summon. It can attack the turn is activated, and the monster is destroyed during the end phase if it was summoned. If you um, if you use this for the fusion summon. The reason this card works in this deck is because you don't care that your fusion materials get banished. Like again, you have Shaman and you have Reignite to just interact with them. The other thing you don't care about is if the monster is destroyed, because Vados cannot be destroyed by card effects. That also includes your own card effects. So essentially, this card stays on the board even under Chain Material. Chain Material makes it so both Extinguish and Ashened of Endlessness can be used with very minimal resources. However, the question in mind is how consistent can this strategy be? Can Chain Material actually be a win condition in this archetype? Can this deck function well with playing stuff like this? And the only time we've seen this card being used was on. I'm not gonna call it an FTK because it's a win condition. It's not set on the first turn, but it's specifically for like an OTK that was done in a hero strategy long ago. Charles to Robert Boyajian. Outside of that, we haven't seen this card being played at all, which means there are no like real contingency plans that says that this card can be like a solid win condition. But yeah, those are just like very small observation. There are other observations you can make with this deck. For example, this deck does not really need its normal summon as long as you have Obsidian in rotation, which means that the Altergeist engine can be played here. I already talked about the Autogeist engine in La Valence video, so feel free to check those out. The Kashtira engine can also play well into this deck. There are very small conflicts, and the hero of the Ashened is level 7, so you can essentially play rank 7s in this deck. But yeah, as of right now, Ashened is in a really tough spot. This deck does not seem very promising into the upcoming format. The one thing that it has going for it is that it can combat Snake Eyes. Yeah, because Snake Eyes are pyro monsters. Outside of that, it's still very soon to tell. I don't. I think we're in for a long overhaul until like the OCG releases for support for this team. Same way with Testina. But yeah, I hope you found this video informative and to your like and understanding. Uh, I will try to experiment with Ashened. I always love experimenting with rogue decks. I feel like there might be something that can make this work. The biggest issue right now is just the heavy restriction on pyro monsters, because before this theme and before Snake Eyes, pyro was not really a very well supported archetype outside of maybe volcanics. But yeah, that's it from me. I hope you found this informative and to your like understanding. More videos coming soon. Keep practicing and keep dueling.